Everyone feared the Alpha King's fiancée, until the Wolfless Omega made her look ridiculous. They say a wolf chooses its mate by scent, Mark Foster murmured, swirling his amber drink. But looking at her, I'd say Anthony chose his future queen by the sharpness of her claws. Paul Adams scoffed from the shadows. Fear chose Kimberly, Mark. The whole pack holds its breath when she walks by. Anthony doesn't love her. He tolerates her. And the girl? Mark nodded toward the corner where Ashley stood, invisible in grey. The wolfless one? She's just furniture, Paul dismissed. A ghost among predators. Mark's gaze darkened. Ghosts have a nasty habit of haunting to the living. Watch closely. The furniture is about to move. The Obsidian Pack house wasn't a home. It was a monument to predatory instinct, disguised as modern architecture. It was all glass, steel, and cold, echoing marble floors that amplified the sound of footsteps, predators approaching, or prey fleeing. Ashley Morgan knew those acoustics better than anyone. As the pack's archivist and designated null, a wolf born without a spirit, essentially human in a world of monsters, she survived by being quiet. Invisibility was her armor. She adjusted the heavy stack of leather-bound treaties in her arms, her fingers trembling slightly, not from the weight, but from the sudden drop in atmospheric pressure that signaled her arrival. The double doors at the end of the grand hall slammed open. Kimberly Scott didn't walk. She prowled on 6-inch stilettos. She was a vision of manufactured perfection, platinum blonde hair cascading in engineered waves, eyes the color of ice, and a scent that was overpowering, crushed roses and metallic blood. She was the Alpha King's fiancée, a political match designed to unite the northern territories, but she ruled like a tyrant who enjoyed the taste of anxiety. "Wrong," Kimberly snapped, her voice cutting through the cavernous hall. 2 Omegas, serving staff aimed at the floor, flinched violently. Kimberly stopped in front of a vase of lilies. With a casual flick of her wrist, she shoved the vase. It shattered against the marble, water and flowers exploding outward. "I said orchids," Kimberly whispered. The silence that followed was suffocating. "Are you deaf or just stupid?" "Apologies, Luna-to-be," one of the girls stammered, tears already welling. "The florist said, I don't care what the florist said." Kimberly stepped closer, her eyes flashing gold, her wolf surfacing. "Clean it up with your hands. If I see a single petal remaining when I return, you'll be running the border patrol route naked in the snow." Ashley, standing 20 feet away by the archive entrance, lowered her head. This was the Daily Theatre. Kimberly needed fear, like flowers needed sunlight. "And you," Kimberly's voice whipped around. Ashley froze. "Don't look up. Don't engage." "The mute," Kimberly sneered, stalking toward Ashley. "The defect." Ashley raised her eyes slowly. She wasn't actually mute, but she found words to be dangerous currency in the right household. "Miss Scott." "That's your highnesses to a genetic dead end like you," Kimberly spat, looming over Ashley. Kimberly was tall, enhanced by her wolf's strength. Ashley was average height, frail by comparison, possessing only human fragility. "Why are you breathing my air, Ashley? Anthony promised to clear the rubbish out of the East Wing." "I am cataloguing the Treaty of 1892 for the Alpha King, Miss Scott," Ashley said, her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "He requires the original text for the summit." Kimberly laughed, a harsh barking sound. She reached out and flicked the top book in Ashley's stack. The heavy tome teetered and fell, landing on Ashley's foot. Pain shot up her leg, sharp and blinding. But Ashley didn't gasp. She didn't blink. She had learned long ago that reaction was what Kimberly fed on. "Oops," Kimberly smirked. "Clumsy. Pick it up." "Is there a problem here?" The voice was low, vibrating through the floorboards like a subterranean tremor. Anthony Wright, the Alpha King, stood at the top of the spiraling staircase. He was a man composed of shadows and hard lines, dark hair falling over eyes that were an unsettling shade of violet, the mark of the royal bloodline. He didn't look angry, he looked bored, which was infinitely worse. His presence sucked the oxygen out of the room. Even Kimberly stiffened, her scent spiking with a sudden, desperate need to please. "Anthony, darling." Kimberly's voice shifted instantly, dripping with syrup. "I was just disciplining the staff. The Null dropped your precious books." Anthony descended the stairs, one hand in his pocket. He moved with a lethality that made the air heavy. He walked past Kimberly as if she were a ghost, stopping directly in front of Ashley. He looked at the book on the floor. Then he looked at Ashley. His gaze was invasive, stripping away layers. He could hear her heartbeat, smell the spike of adrenaline, yet her face remained a mask of polite indifference. "Did you drop it, Ashley?" Anthony asked. His voice was soft, dangerous. Ashley paused. To lie was to insult his intelligence. To tell the truth was to start a war she couldn't win. "Gravity is a harsh mistress, Alpha," Ashley replied neutrally, bending down to retrieve the book. "I should have had a firmer grip." Anthony watched her, his expression unreadable. For a second, a flicker of something, amusement, crossed his eyes. He turned to Kimberly. "The Treaty of 1892 outlines the laws regarding the mistreatment of pack dependents," Anthony said coolly. "Perhaps you should read it, Kimberly, before you break my archivists." Kimberly's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "I was only—" "Dinner is at 8, Anthony cut her off, turning his back. "Do not be late." He walked away, the heavy oak doors of his office closing with a finality that echoed. Kimberly stood trembling, not with fear, but with humiliated rage. She turned back to Ashley, her eyes promising murder. "Enjoy your books, defect," Kimberly hissed, "because once the ring is on my finger, you won't even be a footnote in the history of this pack." The archives were the only place in the territory where the air didn't smell like testosterone and aggression. It smelled of vanilla, old paper, and dust. It was Ashley's kingdom. Technically, Ashley was a ward of the pack. Her parents had been high-ranking Deltas who died in the border wars. But when Ashley failed to shift by her 18th birthday, she became a social pariah. A Wolfless. In a society that worshipped strength, she was a mistake. But Anthony Wright had allowed her to stay, assigning her to the library, a job no wolf wanted. Wolves preferred running and fighting. Reading was considered a weakness. That was their mistake. While they trained their bodies, Ashley trained her mind. She knew the lineage of every family, the loopholes in every law, and the secrets buried in the ledgers. "You pushed her today," a voice said from the shadows of the stacks. Ashley didn't look up from her desk. "Hello, Angela." Angela Turner, the head of the housekeeping staff, stepped into the light. She was a kindly woman with grey streaks in her hair, a beta with a motherly instinct she often suppressed to survive. "She's going to come for you, Ash," Angela warned, placing a wrapped sandwich on the desk. "Kimberly is insecure. That makes her dangerous. Anthony embarrassing her in front of you? That's a death sentence." "Anthony didn't do it for me," Ashley said, unwrapping the food. She was starving. "He hates disorder. Kimberly was making a mess. I was just collateral damage." "You sell yourself short," Angela sighed. "Mark Foster says the king watches you." Ashley laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Mark Foster drinks too much brandy. The king looks at me like I'm a scientific curiosity, a wolf that didn't bake all the way through." "Maybe," Angela said, lowering her voice. "Or maybe he's tired of women who only want him for the crown." "Kimberly, she's planning something for the gala tomorrow. The Lunar Eclipse Gala. All the neighboring alphas will be there." "She's planning a dress reveal?" Ashley guessed. "She's planning a demonstration," Angela corrected grimly. "She's been digging into the old rites. She wants to prove her dominance, and she needs a whipping boy to do it. Stay in your room tomorrow night, Ashley. Please. Ashley looked at the sandwich, her appetite suddenly gone. I can't. The king requested the translation of the northern runes. He wants me present in case the visiting alpha from the Frost Pack has questions. Angela went pale. Then God help you. Later that night, Ashley sat by the high window of the library, looking out at the moon. It was nearly full, a heavy silver coin in the sky. For normal wolves, the moon was a source of power, a chaotic energy that made their skin itch and their bones ache to shift. For Ashley, it was just a beautiful rock. She felt a draft. She turned to find Anthony standing in the doorway. He moved so silently it was unnatural even for an alpha. He was wearing a casual black shirt, the sleeves rolled up, revealing scars on his forearms that spoke of violent victories. You're working late, he stated. The runes are complex, Alpha, she replied, standing up as protocol demanded. She didn't bow, though. She stopped doing that years ago, when she realized no one looked at her long enough to notice. Anthony walked into the room, running a finger along the spine of a book. Kimberly wants you gone. I am aware. She says you make the pack look weak, that having a crippled Omega in the main house is an embarrassment. Ashley kept her chin up. I assume you didn't come here to ask my permission to evict me. Anthony stopped and looked at her. The intensity of his violet eyes was physically heavy. No, I came to ask why you didn't flinch. Excuse me? This afternoon, when the book fell, when she threatened you. Most wolves can smell her killing intent. They cower. You didn't. Your heart rate spiked, but you stood your ground. Why? Ashley considered lying, but she was tired. Because, Your Majesty, Kimberly is a bully with a title. She uses fear like a blunt instrument. It's boring. Anthony's eyebrows shot up. Boring? Predictable, Ashley corrected. She thinks power is noise. She thinks breaking a vase makes her a queen. Real power is control. You didn't raise your voice today, and you silenced the room. She screams, and everyone just wishes she would stop. Anthony stared at her for a long, stretching moment. The silence wasn't empty. It was charged, electric. A slow, dark smile spread across his face, a genuine smile, one that didn't reach the tabloids. Be careful, Ashley Morgan, he murmured, leaning in close enough that she could smell the scent of rain and dark pine forest on his skin. If you're not careful, I might start thinking you're the most dangerous person in this house. He turned and left. Ashley sank back into her chair, her legs suddenly shaking. The Lunar Eclipse Gala was a sensory overload. The grand ballroom was draped in red velvet and gold, lit by thousands of floating candles. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, roasting meats, and the pheromones of 50 powerful alphas jockeying for status. Ashley stood in the shadow of a pillar, dressed in a simple, high-necked black gown she had sewn herself. It was modest, designed to blend into the background. She held a tablet, ready to translate, trying to make herself as small as possible. In the center of the room, Kimberly Scott held court. She was wearing a dress made of red silk that looked like spilled blood, covered in diamonds. She was radiant, terrifying, and loud. She clung to Anthony's arm, though the king looked like he would rather be fighting a bear with his bare hands than standing there. Ladies and gentlemen, Kimberly's voice rang out, amplified by a microphone. The music stopped. Tonight, we celebrate not just the moon, but the purity of our bloodlines. A polite ripple of applause. My family, the Scotts, have served the crown for 10 generations, Kimberly announced, her eyes scanning the crowd until they locked onto Ashley in the shadows. A cruel smirk twisted her lips. We value strength, perfection. Unlike some... She snapped her fingers. 2 guards stepped forward, dragging a covered easel into the center of the room. "I have commissioned a genealogy study," Kimberly declared, letting go of Anthony to stand by the easel, "to prove that my union with King Anthony is destined by the stars. But first, we must acknowledge the history that binds us." She ripped the cover off the easel. It was a massive, ancient-looking tapestry, tattered and stained. "This," Kimberly boomed, "is the lost tapestry of King Valerius. My father spent a fortune retrieving it from the southern ruins. It depicts the first Scot warrior defending the first Alpha King from a horde of demons. It is proof of my family's eternal loyalty." The crowd gasped. This was a legendary artifact, thought lost for centuries. Even Anthony looked intrigued, stepping forward. "Bring the archivist," Kimberly commanded, pointing a manicured finger at Ashley. "Let the Wolfless girl verify it. Let her read the ancient script and tell you all of my family's glory. Unless she's too stupid to read High Lycan?" The crowd parted, hundreds of eyes fixed on Ashley. It was a trap. If she confirmed it, she boosted Kimberly's ego. If she couldn't read it, she would be mocked and likely fired for incompetence. Ashley walked forward. The marble floor felt cold through her thin soles. She stopped before the tapestry. She could feel Kimberly's smug radiation, the heat of her anticipation. Ashley adjusted her glasses. She looked at the tapestry. She looked closer. She squinted at the weave, the dye, and the symbols. The room was silent. "Well," Kimberly goaded, "read the inscription. Defect. Tell them who the hero is." Ashley turned to face the king. She ignored Kimberly entirely. "Your Majesty," Ashley said, her voice clear, projecting without a microphone. "Do you wish for the academic translation or the poetic one?" "The truth, Ashley," Anthony said, his eyes locked on hers. "Very well." Ashley gestured to the tapestry. "This is indeed a rare find. It is a tapestry from the southern region, dated roughly 300 years ago." "See?" Kimberly gloated. 300 years of glory. "However," Ashley continued, her voice slicing through Kimberly's celebration, "it is not the tapestry of King Valerius. The weaving technique here, the double-loop knot, was utilized specifically by the goblin traders of the lower marshlands." A few murmurs in the crowd. Kimberly's smile faltered. "What are you babbling about?" "And the inscription?" Ashley pointed to the faded symbols at the bottom. "It is not High Lycan. It is a dialect known as Patter-speak. It's a nursery rhyme." "You lie!" Kimberly shrieked. "It depicts a warrior fighting a demon." Ashley walked to the tapestry and pointed to the demon. "This figure here? It holds a ladle, and the warrior holds a sausage." Someone in the back snorted. The inscription reads, Ashley cleared her throat and translated fluently, "Here lies Snuffles, the bravest hound, who stole the butcher's finest ham and ran all the way to the river." Silence. Absolute, stunned silence. Then, Mark Foster let out a loud, drunken guffaw. It broke the dam. A ripple of laughter spread through the room. The terrifying alphas, the high society ladies, they all began to chuckle. The image of the fierce Kimberly Scott bragging about a tapestry dedicated to a sausage-stealing dog named Snuffles was too much. Kimberly stood frozen, her face turning a shade of purple that clashed horribly with her red dress. You lying little rat! I'll have your tongue. I can provide a carbon dating analysis and a linguistic breakdown by morning, Ashley said calmly, though her knees were shaking. But the weave does not lie, Miss Scott. You paid a fortune for a memorial to a very hungry pet. Kimberly screamed, a primal, animalistic sound of rage. She raised her hand, claws extending, aiming to strike Ashley across the face. Ashley didn't move. She couldn't outrun a wolf. She braced for the impact. But it never came. A hand caught Kimberly's wrist in midair. A hand with the strength of a hydraulic press. Anthony stood between them, He wasn't laughing. He was terrifyingly calm. He released Kimberly's wrist with a shove that sent her stumbling back in her high heels. "That is enough," Anthony said. His voice wasn't loud, but it commanded the submission of every wolf in the room. He turned to Ashley. The court held its breath. The king looked down at the wolfless girl who had just humiliated his fiancée. "Snuffles?" Anthony asked, a dangerous glint in his eye. "A very good boy, apparently," Ashley whispered. Anthony let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound so rare the room went quiet again. "Go to your room, Ashley, before she tries to bite you again." Ashley curtsied low. "Your Majesty." She walked out of the ballroom, head held high, leaving Kimberly Scott standing amidst the wreckage of her ego, the laughter of the court ringing in her ears. But as Ashley turned the corner into the safety of the corridor, she leaned against the wall and slid down, gasping for air. She had won the battle. She had made the Alpha King laugh and the fiancé look ridiculous, but as she touched her neck, she realized the truth. She hadn't just embarrassed Kimberly. She had just painted a target on her own back, one that no amount of wit could protect her from. The game had officially changed from survival to war. The morning after the gala, the Obsidian Pack house was eerily quiet. It was the silence of a held breath, the calm before a hurricane makes landfall. Ashley woke up with a headache that throbbed in time with her pulse, the adrenaline of the previous night having curdled into a cold, hard knot of dread. She dressed quickly in her grey uniform, the colour of shadows, of dust, of nothingness. She needed to get to the archives. The library was her sanctuary, the one place where the hierarchy of teeth and claws didn't apply. But when she pushed open the heavy oak doors, the smell hit her first. It wasn't the comforting scent of vanilla and old parchment. It was the smell of damp rot, vinegar, and something sharp, like ammonia. Ashley stopped in the doorway, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a gasp. The archives had been decimated. The long mahogany tables were overturned. The floor was a sea of torn paper, pages ripped from bindings like feathers plucked from a bird. But the true horror was the shelves. Someone had taken jars of black ink and industrial cleaning solvent and hurled them against the spines of the ancient texts. The Treaty of 1892, the book Anthony had requested, lay in the center of the room, soaked in a puddle of black sludge, ruined beyond repair. It was a massacre of history. "Oops," a voice drawled from the upper balcony. Ashley looked up. Kimberly Scott stood leaning against the railing, examining her nails. She was wearing a silk robe and holding a steaming cup of coffee, looking every inch the Queen surveying her conquered land. "The cleaning crew said there was a mold infestation," Kimberly said, her voice light, innocent. "They had to take drastic measures. I told them to be thorough." Ashley walked slowly into the room, her boots crunching on the glass of a shattered display case. She picked up a handful of wet, black pulp that used to be a census record from the First War. She felt a physical ache in her chest, a grief so sharp it almost brought her to her knees. These weren't just books, they were the Pack's memory, and Kimberly had erased them because of a joke about a dog. "You didn't clean," Ashley said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You murdered." Kimberly descended the spiral stairs, the silk of her robe whispering against the metal. "Don't be dramatic, Defect. They're just papers, old dusty trash. Just like you." She stopped inches from Ashley, her perfume, roses and blood, cloying in the stagnant air. "You thought you were clever last night," Kimberly hissed, her eyes flashing that dangerous, wolfish gold. "You thought you could make the Pack laugh at me. But you forgot something, Ashley. Wolves have short memories for jokes, but they remember power. I have power. You have nothing." Kimberly kicked a soaking wet book toward Ashley. "Clean this up. If it's not spotless by noon, I'll tell Anthony you had a tantrum and destroyed his property. Who do you think he'll believe? His future wife, or the unstable Wolfless girl?" Kimberly turned and sauntered out, laughing softly. Ashley stood alone in the wreckage. The urge to scream clawed at her throat. It was unfair, it was cruel, it was exactly what she expected. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Instead, she took a deep breath, tied her hair back, and knelt on the floor. She began to pick up the pieces. 2 hours later, the doors opened again. Ashley didn't look up, assuming it was Kimberly returning to gloat. "Leave me alone," she said, scrubbing at an ink stain on the floorboards until her knuckles were raw. "I wasn't aware I was disturbing you." Ashley froze. She knew that voice. It was the low rumble of a storm trapped in a human chest. She looked up. Anthony Wright was standing in the doorway. He was dressed for a meeting, a charcoal suit that made his shoulders look impossibly broad, but his tie was loosened, and his expression was thunderous. He looked at the overturned tables. He looked at the ruined books. He looked at Ashley, on her knees, her hand stained black with ink, her face pale and streaked with sweat. Anthony stepped into the room. The air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Who did this?" Ashley stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. "There was a mold infestation, apparently." Anthony walked over to the ruined treaty of 1892. He picked it up with 2 fingers, the black sludge dripping onto the pristine marble. He smelled it. "Ink and solvent," he said quietly. "Hardly a fungicide." He dropped the book. "Kimberly." It wasn't a question. "She said she was helping," Ashley said, her voice devoid of emotion. "She was too tired to play games. She said if it wasn't clean by noon, she'd tell you I did it." Anthony looked at her. For the first time, Ashley saw something crack in his stoic mask. It wasn't just anger. It was exhaustion. It was the look of a man who was holding up the sky and realizing the people beneath him were chipping away at his footing. "Leave it," Anthony commanded. "I can't. If I don't, I said leave it." Anthony's voice boomed, making the windows rattle. Ashley flinched. Anthony closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. "I apologize. I am not shouting at you." He opened his eyes, and the violet irises were swirling with agitation. "Go to the kitchens. Get food. Get rest. Do not touch another piece of this wreckage." "But the history," Ashley whispered. "The history is gone, Ashley," Anthony said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "But the future is becoming very clear to me." He turned and walked out, not toward his office, but toward the wing where Kimberly's suite was located. As he passed the threshold, Ashley saw him unclench his hand. The marble doorframe where he had been resting his palm was cracked, a spiderweb of fractures radiating from where his fingers had been. 3 days passed. The archives were locked. Rumors flew through the pack house like crows. Some said the king had shouted so loud the glass in Kimberly's room shattered. Others said Kimberly had cried and claimed Ashley attacked her. Ashley stayed in her small room in the servants' quarters, working on mending linens. She was in exile, waiting for the axe to fall. On the 4th night, a knock came at her door. It wasn't the heavy pound of a guard. It was a rhythmic tap. 3 beats, a pause, 1 beat. Ashley opened the door. Mark Foster stood there, holding a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. He looked harried, his tie askew. "Can I come in? Paul is lecturing me about caloric intake, and if I hear the word metabolism one more time, I'm going to bite him." Ashley stepped back. "Mark, what are you doing here?" "Hiding," Mark said, squeezing past her and sitting on her narrow bed, "and delivering a message, though the message is mostly an excuse to hide." "A message from whom?" "The big bad wolf." Mark poured the wine. "Anthony wants to see you." Ashley's stomach dropped. "Am I being fired?" Mark laughed, handing her a glass. "Fired?" Darling, after what you did to the archives, he's more likely to give you a medal. He knows it wasn't you. He has eyes, despite what Kimberly thinks. Then why does he want to see me? Because he's bored, Mark said, his face turning serious. And because he's lonely. Being king is lonely, Ash. Everyone wants something. Power, protection, status. You just want to read your books. You're the only person in this castle who doesn't look at him like he's a meal ticket. Mark finished his wine in one gulp and stood up. Go to the east balcony. Take a jacket. It's freezing. Ashley found Anthony on the east balcony, a secluded stretch of stone overlooking the vast pine forests of the territory. It was snowing lightly, great flakes drifting down in the silence. Anthony was leaning against the parapet, staring out at the dark tree line. He wasn't wearing a coat, the cold seemingly unable to penetrate his alpha heat. Mark talks too much, Anthony said without turning around. He said you were hiding, Ashley said, clutching her threadbare cardigan tighter around herself. Anthony turned. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face. He looked tired, but the tension from the library was gone, replaced by a somber stillness. I brought you something, Anthony said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. Ashley took it. It was old, the leather cracked, but dry. She opened it. The Annals of the First Pack, Volume 4. It was in my private study, Anthony explained. Kimberly couldn't reach it. It's not the treaty, but it's history. Ashley ran her fingers over the pages. Thank you, Alpha. Anthony. She looked up. Sir, my name is Anthony. When we are alone, you do not call me Alpha. You do not call me King. You call me Anthony. The request was so intimate, so forbidden, that Ashley felt a blush rise to her cheeks. That wouldn't be proper. I don't care about propriety. Anthony stepped closer. He was so large, blocking the wind, creating a pocket of warmth around her. I care about truth. You told the truth at the gala. You told the truth in the library. Everyone else lies to me, Ashley. They tell me what I want to hear. You tell me about Snuffles the dog. A small smile tugged at Ashley's lips. It was a very nice tapestry. Anthony chuckled, a low rumble that she felt in her own chest. Why do you stay? Excuse me. You could leave. You're human, for all intents and purposes. You could go to the city, live a normal life. No wolves, no danger, no Kimberly. Why do you stay in a place that treats you like furniture? Ashley looked out at the snow. Because this is my home, Anthony. My parents are buried by the river. My history is here. Just because I don't have claws doesn't mean I don't belong to the land. She looked back at him, her brown eyes meeting his violet ones. And perhaps I think someone needs to keep track of the truth, even if it's just Snuffles. Anthony stared at her. The air between them shifted. It wasn't the aggressive sexual tension of the court. It was something heavier, magnetic. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. He tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers grazed her skin. Ashley gasped. It wasn't a static shock. It was a jolt of warmth, a feeling of rightness that slammed into her core. Anthony pulled his hand back as if burned. His eyes went wide, the pupils dilating until the violet was nearly swallowed by black. He took a jagged breath. You're cold, he said abruptly, his voice rough. Go inside. Anthony? Go! It was a command. Ashley turned and fled, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't understand what had happened. She was wolfless. She couldn't have a mate. She couldn't feel the bond. But as she ran down the hall, she could still feel the ghost of his touch on her cheek, burning like a brand. The truce didn't last. 2 weeks later, the annual winter hunt arrived. It was a tradition as old as the pack. The Alpha and his elite guard would hunt the great elks that migrated through the valley. It was a display of strength, a bonding ritual. And this year, Kimberly insisted Ashley attend. "We need a scribe," Kimberly had argued at breakfast, smiling sweetly at Anthony, "to record the kill counts, to make it official. Who better than Ashley? She needs fresh air." Anthony had refused, but the Council of Elders had agreed. Tradition dictated a scribe be present, and the usual scribe was down with the flu. So Ashley found herself tramping through knee-deep snow, dressed in borrowed thermal gear that was 2 sizes too big, carrying a heavy pack of supplies. The hunting party consisted of Anthony, Kimberly, Mark, Paul, and 4 elite warriors. They moved fast in their human forms, their superior strength making the hike easy. Ashley struggled to keep up, her lungs burning in the freezing air. Kimberly made sure to set a brutal pace. "Keep up, defects. The elk won't wait." They reached the high pass by noon. The wind was howling, whipping snow into a blinding white sheet. "We should turn back," Mark shouted over the wind. "A storm is coming in fast. This isn't just a squall." "Nonsense," Kimberly shouted back, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "I smell the herd. They're close. Are you a coward, Mark?" Anthony looked at the sky. It was a bruising purple-grey. "Mark is right. The pressure is dropping too fast. We head for the hunting cabin, now." "But Anthony," Kimberly whined. "Now," Anthony barked. They turned, but the mountain had other plans. A cracking sound echoed through the valley, louder than thunder, sharper than a gunshot. "Avalanche!" Paul screamed. They looked up. High above them, a shelf of snow had sheared off the peak. It was coming down like a white tidal wave. "Run!" Anthony roared. He grabbed Ashley, who was frozen in terror, and threw her toward the shelter of a rock overhang. "Get down!" The world turned white. The roar was deafening, a physical weight that pressed the air out of the lungs. Ashley curled into a ball, covering her head as tons of snow slammed into the mountain around them. Then, silence. Ashley coughed, pushing snow away from her face. She was alive. The overhang had saved her. "Anthony," she called out, her voice thin in the vast whiteness. "Here." Anthony emerged from a snowbank 10 feet away, shaking himself off like a dog. He looked around. "Sound off!" "Here," Mark called from a tree line. "I'm good," Paul yelled. The guards called out one by one. "Kimberly," Anthony called. Silence. "Kimberly, help!" A muffled scream came from down the slope. "Anthony, help me!" They scrambled down the shifting snow. Kimberly was clinging to a jagged root protruding from the edge of a ravine. The avalanche had swept the path away. Below her was a 50-foot drop onto jagged rocks. "Hold on!" Anthony shouted, moving to the edge. "Don't!" Ashley screamed. Anthony stopped, looking back. "What?" "Look at the snow," Ashley pointed. "The pattern. It's a cornice, a false edge. If you step there, the whole shelf breaks, and you both fall." Anthony looked at the snow. To the untrained eye, it looked solid. But Ashley had read every geological survey of the region. She knew how the wind sculpted the ice. "She's lying!" Kimberly shrieked, her grip slipping. "She wants me to die. Save me, Anthony." "Shut up, Kimberly," Anthony growled, his eyes fixed on the snow. He looked at Ashley. "How do I get to her?" Ashley scanned the terrain. Her mind raced, pulling up diagrams of weight distribution and leverage she had read in a survival manual years ago. "You can't go to her," Ashley said, stepping forward. "You're too heavy. Your muscle mass. You'll break the crust." "So we watch her fall?" Mark asked, horrified. "No." Ashley unbuckled her heavy pack. She took off her heavy coat. She was shivering instantly, but she felt lighter. "I go." "No," Anthony said immediately. "Absolutely not." "I weigh 110 pounds, Anthony," Ashley said calmly, taking a coil of rope from Mark's pack. "I'm the only one light enough to crawl out there without collapsing the cornice." "Ashley," If you fall, Anthony's voice cracked. Then I fall, she said. She tied the rope around her waist and tossed the other end to Anthony. Anchor me. Don't let go. Never, Anthony promised, wrapping the rope around his forearms, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that warmed her blood. Ashley got down on her stomach. The snow was freezing against her thin shirt. She began to crawl, inch by inch, toward the edge. Hurry up, you useless girl, Kimberly sobbed. Keep moving or I leave you there, Ashley said through gritted teeth. She reached the edge. She could see the drop. It made her dizzy. She reached out her hand. Grab my hand, Kimberly. Kimberly looked at Ashley. For a second, the hatred was still there. But the fear was stronger. Kimberly reached up and grabbed Ashley's hand. Her grip was bruising, panicked claws digging into Ashley's skin. I've got you, Ashley gasped, the weight pulling her shoulder socket. Anthony! Pull! Anthony hauled on the rope. He walked backward, his boots digging deep furrows in the snow, pulling both women away from the abyss. They slid back onto solid ground. Kimberly collapsed, gasping and sobbing. Ashley lay on her back, staring at the grey sky, her arm throbbing where Kimberly had clawed her. A shadow fell over her. Anthony was there. He dropped to his knees, ignoring his fiancée, and pulled Ashley into a crushing embrace. He buried his face in her neck, breathing in her scent, shaking uncontrollably. You foolish, brave little human, he whispered against her skin. Kimberly looked up from the snow, shivering and traumatized. She saw the king holding the wolfless girl. She saw the way Anthony's hand cradled the back of Ashley's head, protective and possessive. And for the first time, Kimberly Scott didn't look angry. She looked terrified, because she finally realized what Paul Adams had known all along. The furniture had moved, and it had just taken the center of the room. News of the avalanche spread through the obsidian pack like wildfire, but by the time the rescue team reached the main house, the truth had been twisted into something unrecognizable. Kimberly Scott didn't just survive. She seized the narrative. Before Anthony could even change out of his frozen gear, Kimberly had convened with the Council of Elders. She stood before them, wrapped in blankets, weeping theatrical tears, painting a picture of a clumsy, malicious servant who had triggered the slide and nearly killed the king. She's bad luck, Kimberly sobbed, pointing a trembling finger at the door where Ashley was being held by 2 guards. A curse! The mountain rejected her, and we almost paid the price. The Wolfless are an affront to nature. As long as she remains in the Alpha's house, we are all in danger. Ashley stood in the center of the council chamber, her hands cuffed with silver. Unnecessary, as silver didn't burn her human skin, but the symbolism was heavy. She was exhausted, her shoulder throbbing, her body cold. Do you have a defense, girl? Elder Thorne asked, his voice gravelly. He was a traditionalist who had always viewed Ashley with suspicion. The truth is my defense, Ashley said, her voice raspy. The snow was unstable, a cornice. I navigated it to save Miss Scott because she was too heavy to save herself. Lies! Kimberly shrieked, her eyes wild. She wants to take my place. She thinks because she read a few books, she knows better than a born wolf. The doors banged open. Anthony strode in, still wearing his torn hunting gear, radiating a fury so potent that the candles in the room flickered and died. Release her, Anthony commanded. We cannot, Alpha. Elder Thorne stood up. The charges are grave. Attempted regicide through negligence. Kimberly claims the girl deliberately loosened the snowpack. Anthony stepped up to the dais, looming over Kimberly. Kimberly was paralyzed by fear. Ashley saved her life. I was there. You are compromised, my king, Kimberly cried out, a desperate gambit. She has bewitched you. It is a known trick of the Nulls. They have no wolf, so they steal the minds of others. Look at how you look at her. You favor a cripple over your own mate, the council murmured. It was a dangerous accusation. If an alpha was seen as mentally compromised, the council could invoke the right of challenge. I demand the right of the alpha's will, Kimberly shouted, playing her final terrible card. If she is truly worthy to stand in this house, let her face the full pressure of your dominance, Anthony. Let us see who breaks. The room went deadly silent. The right of the alpha's will was an ancient, brutal test. The alpha would release his full spiritual pressure, the aura. Wolves would be forced to their knees in submission. Humans usually fainted, their minds unable to handle the psychic weight. Occasionally, they died of heart failure. You want me to kill her? Anthony snarled, his eyes glowing violet. I want you to prove you aren't controlled by her, Kimberly countered with a sneer. If she is just a human servant, she will faint, and we will exile her for her weakness. If she is a witch, well, the aura will burn it out of her. Unless you are afraid she is too weak. Anthony looked at Ashley. He was about to refuse, to tear the council apart with his bare hands. I accept, Ashley said softly. Anthony whipped his head around. Ashley, no. You don't know what you're agreeing to. I am tired of being called weak, Anthony, she said, meeting his gaze. I am tired of hiding. Let's finish this. The rite took place at midnight in the stone circle of the courtyard. The entire pack gathered, sensing blood. Kimberly stood on one side of the circle, dressed in warrior leathers, looking triumphant. She was a high-born wolf. She had trained her whole life to withstand alpha pressure. She would bow, of course. Submission was natural. But she would remain conscious. Ashley, the frail human, would be crushed. Ashley stood opposite her, wearing her simple grey dress. She looked small against the towering pines and the moonlit stone. Anthony stood in the centre. He looked like an executioner who had been forced to hold the axe against his own neck. Begin, Elder Thorne commanded. Anthony closed his eyes. He had no choice. If he held back, the council would depose him. He had to release the beast. A low growl started deep in his chest. It wasn't a sound. It was a vibration that rattled the teeth of everyone watching. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and ancient apex power. Anthony pushed it out. The alpha command. Submit. The effect was instantaneous. Around the courtyard, the spectators dropped to one knee, heads bowed, unable to meet the king's gaze. It was biology. It was instinct. Kimberly Scott, in the center of the ring, buckled. She tried to stand, her knees shaking, veins popping in her forehead as she fought the command. But the violet aura hammered her down. With a whimper of frustration and pain, she collapsed to her knees, then onto her hands, pressing her forehead to the cold stone in total, abject submission. Her wolf forced her down. The pressure increased. It was suffocating. And in the middle of the crushing gravity, Ashley Morgan stood. She blinked. She looked around. She felt a breeze. She felt a slight headache, like the air pressure drop before a storm. But she felt no urge to kneel. She had no inner wolf to answer the call. She had no instinct that told her to expose her neck. She was just a human woman looking at a man who was shouting with his soul. The silence stretched. It became awkward. Anthony opened his eyes, expecting to see Ashley unconscious or dead. Instead, he saw her standing there, hands clasped politely in front of her, looking slightly concerned. Are you finished? Ashley asked, her voice cutting through the silence like a bell. Kimberly, face pressed to the dirt, let out a strangled gasp of horror. Anthony stared. The council stared. The pack stared. She stands, Elder Thorne whispered, his voice trembling. The alpha exerts his full will, and she stands. How? Kimberly screamed into the dirt, unable to lift her head against the pressure Anthony was still inadvertently releasing. She should be dead. She's a defect. Ashley took a step forward. The pressure that was pinning Kimberly to the ground washed over Ashley like harmless water. She walked right up to Anthony, who was looking at her as if she were a deity. "You can stop now, Anthony," she said gently, reaching out and touching his arm. "Everyone is looking at the floor. It's quite embarrassing for them." Anthony cut the flow of power instantly. The crowd gasped, air rushing back into their lungs. Kimberly scrambled up, her face covered in dust, her hair a mess. "Witchcraft!" Kimberly shrieked, pointing at Ashley. "She has no soul. That's why she doesn't bow. She's a monster." "No," Anthony said. His voice was calm, but it carried a new weight, a realization that changed the world. "She didn't bow because she is not my subject, Kimberly." He turned to the crowd, grabbing Ashley's hand and raising it high. "A wolf chooses a mate who submits," Anthony declared, his voice ringing off the stone walls. "But a king needs a partner who can stand when the world forces everyone else to their knees. A king needs an equal." He looked at Ashley, a smile breaking through his stoic mask. "The curse of the Wolfless is that they are the only ones free enough to truly love an alpha without fear." Kimberly stood alone, dusty and defeated. The pack looked from their powerful, terrifying king to the small woman in grey who had just walked through a hurricane without messing up her hair. And then Mark Foster started to clap, then Paul, then Angela, then the guards. The sound swelled, a thunder of applause that drowned out Kimberly's protests. It wasn't the applause of fear, it was the applause of respect. Kimberly Scott looked around, realized the game was over, and for the first time in her life, she ran. She fled the circle, disappearing into the shadows, a footnote in the history she had tried so hard to rewrite. The wedding of King Anthony and Ashley Morgan was not the traditional affair of blood oaths and moon howling. It was a quiet ceremony in the library, attended by the pack, but officiated among the books that Ashley loved. The transition wasn't seamless. There were whispers. A human queen? A wolfless Luna? But the whispers died down quickly, because when the harvest negotiations stalled, it was Ashley who found the loophole in the trade agreement that saved the pack millions. When the neighboring alphas came to posture and threaten, they found themselves disarmed not by claws, but by a woman who offered them tea and then politely dismantled their political arguments until they apologized. The Obsidian Pack changed. The fear that had ruled under the threat of Kimberly's ambition was replaced by a strange, efficient calm. 6 months after the wedding, Ashley sat at her old desk in the archives, now the Queen's study, working on the restoration of the Treaty of 1892. "You're working too hard," Anthony said, leaning against the doorframe. He looked different these days. Lighter. The perpetual scowl was gone, replaced by a contentment that softened the hard lines of his face. "I'm almost done," Ashley smiled, putting down her pen. "And I found something interesting." "Oh." Anthony walked over, wrapping his arms around her shoulders from behind, burying his face in her neck. "This clause here," she tapped the parchment. "It says that the alpha's mate is entitled to the spoil of the hunt." "That is correct." "Does that mean I get the last slice of the blueberry pie you hid in the kitchen?" Anthony laughed, a full, rich sound that filled the room. "You are a ruthless negotiator, my queen." "But yes, the pie is yours." He spun her chair around and kissed her. It wasn't the kiss of a feral beast claiming a mate. It was the kiss of a man who had found the one person in the world who saw him. Not as a title, but as a soul. "They used to call you the Wolfless Omega," Anthony whispered against her lips. "If only they knew." "Knew what?" "That you have the heart of a lion." Ashley smiled, pulling him closer. "No lions, Anthony. Just a very well-read librarian who refused to be afraid of the big, bad wolf." Outside the window, the moon shone down on the pack lands, silver, bright and impartial. It shone on the wolves running the border, and it shone on the humans sleeping in their beds. It shone on a kingdom that had finally learned that power wasn't about how loud you could roar, but about how firmly you could stand your ground when silence fell. The curse was broken. The furniture had not only moved, it had rebuilt the house. And the wolfless girl? She reigned supreme, not by force, but by the undeniable, terrifying power of being exactly who she was, in a world that constantly tells us we must be loud to be heard and aggressive to be strong. Ashley Morgan's story is a quiet revolution. She reminds us that true power doesn't come from fitting into the mold society builds for us, whether that's the mold of an alpha, a beauty queen, or a perfect employee. True power comes from embracing the things that make us other. Ashley's lack of a wolf was her greatest weapon. Her silence was louder than Kimberly's screams. Her intellect was sharper than any claw. We all have a wolfless part of us, a part that feels inadequate, different, or broken. But as Ashley proved, that very difference might be the one thing that allows us to remain standing when the rest of the world falls to its knees. Don't let the Kimberly Scotts of the world convince you that your worth is tied to their standards. Read your books, speak your truth, stand your ground, and if they try to intimidate you, just remember, even the scariest monsters look ridiculous when you turn on the lights. If you enjoyed this story of underdogs, romance, and sweet revenge, please leave a like, share this with a friend who needs a reminder of their own strength, and subscribe for more stories where the quiet ones change the world.